Okay, hey, this is Dan again, and I wanted to kind of put the marks I have along with the one I'm borrowing together and make a couple of observations about these amps. So the one on top with the wood and wicker enclosure is a Mark III. It's a blue stripe Mark III that I've had for almost 30 years now, which is crazy. On the right hand side is a JP2C, which is the John Petrucci signature kind of Super 2C Plus, based on his favorite amp, and with some bells and whistles like two graphic EQs. And then over here on the left, I have what's kind of my go-to amp for rehearsals and gigging, which is my Mark V. And then we have this purple stripe S configuration Mark III, and basically there's like DRG and HRG, which talk about like if it has a graphic equalizer, if it's simulclass or not, if it has reverb, and there's also S, which is I think it has to do with wattage or something like that. I can't remember right now, but basically this is the bare bones model. There's no EQ, no reverb, no simulclass. It's not 100 watts; it's 60 watts. Which is also worth saying that the Mark III on top of the 4x12 there has two modes, which are 15 watt mode and 75 watt mode, and 15 watt is obscenely loud, and the 60 watts is plenty for the other Mark III. The JP2C can be set to 60 watt or 100 watt, and I kind of use them both. Definitely if I'm using that slanted 1x12, I use the 60 watt mode because that's all it can take. Anyways, I just wanted to say that I've worked with a lot of different marks. I have not worked with the 2C Plus, which everybody loves, and they're great amps. But I can talk about a couple of things that I've found. One is I used to just obsess about the differences between these amps, and I did like a ton of A/Bing and tried dialing in all these different sounds. And what was really interesting was when I borrowed this Mark III from the Seattle Guitar Store. They're amazing people there, because I said I wanted to do some of these videos. It was an opportunity to learn how to actually dial in a Mark without any graphic EQ. And if you read through the manuals and that kind of thing, the graphic EQ has become a de facto standard for these amps these days. But with the Mark III, especially in the manual, they said basically like, this comes with an EQ, but these amps are designed without having an EQ in mind, and they're meant to be like phenomenal sounding without an EQ as well. And there are different things that you do to dial things in. I've got another video that talks about that, and basically there's a lot you can do. It was designed to be a very versatile amp. You can dial in things, kind of the happy medium settings are what I call it, so you can switch between all three channels and use and have usable tones, especially, and that's more for like a live playing thing or a rehearsal kind of thing. Or you can dial in configurations that are optimized for like the lead channel or for the clean channel, but kind of basically when you switch to the opposite channel, the settings are going to be somewhat compromised. So like a really strong lead is going to dirty up the cleans. A really pristine clean is going to mean that you lose some of the aggressive edge in the lead. So anyways, all this aside, I've taken various marks with me into band situations. I've always played with another guitarist. I really like that kind of interplay back and forth. And one of the things that I noticed is that my sound would just vanish. And some of that was due to using the EQ and scooping out the mids. When you're playing by yourself, or you're the only guitarist or something like that, scooping the mids just sounds like really wicked cool. I've kind of reached the point now when I actually use an EQ and scoop out the mids, I can like hear the life just being sucked out of the amp, because the mids are the guitar's home turf. And it's a mid-range instrument, and when you go into a mix with a band, you have drums that are occupying like low frequencies and high frequencies. The bass is obviously occupying really low frequencies, and the place where the guitar isn't competing with anybody is in the mid-range. And so you can dial in like really fizzy, bright sounds and really concussive bass. And those are areas where you're going to be fighting with people that are already there, basically also competing for those frequencies. And if you scoop out the mids, it's the only place where you're really uncontested, and suddenly you don't have any sound. And so suddenly you go from like just really heavy sound to this like you can, it sounds really fizzy and really, really empty. None of the other guitarists I ever worked with have scooped their mids, and so they would just be like profoundly present, and I would just watch this thing vanish. And I started working with shallower and shallower scooped Vs, and then eventually when I borrowed this purple stripe, after working with that for a while, I took the Mark V in, and so I started turning off the EQ on the Mark V and cranking the mids, which is kind of a Kurt Cobain's signature move, with his Mesa Studio preamp, which is also based on the Mark. And I immediately stood out in the mix. And suddenly I could hear myself, and it sounded great. The other thing I ended up doing was really dialing back the gain. When you're in a mix with a lot of other instruments, it starts to sound really fizzy and really muddy, and you can dial back the gain and maybe turn up the presence a little bit, and you can just feel, it's like contrast or something. You just start standing out more and more and more in the mix. And I've kind of reached the point where I feel like in a live mix you're not going to really see a big difference between any of these marks when you're actually playing. If you want to hear yourself, I would recommend, if you're competing with another guitarist, and certainly with the rest of the band, I'd recommend leaving the EQ off and sticking with the regular tone controls, or possibly using it to just boost like some of the bottom end or something like that. Another thing, one of my friends came up with something from the boogie board, and he actually had noticed that the 6K slider and the presence control kind of do the same thing, but they do it differently. And if you are going to use the EQ, don't dime your presence and jack the 6 kilohertz slider up at the same time, because it just becomes just incredibly fizzy. But something that you can do is dial these things in kind of moderately and play them off of each other a little bit. I definitely feel like there's kind of this a mark is a mark is a mark kind of thing. And when you've got it sitting in a mix, you've got the gain about halfway up, it sounds phenomenal, and it's a beast. They're all beasts. They sound great. I think that any mark after the 2C plus, or including the 2C plus, that you take into a band situation is going to sound great. And you can certainly dial any of these amps in to sound great in the studio too, for a specific thing. Obviously, some of these amps have more bells and whistles. The Mark V is a 3-channel amp. The JP2C is a 3-channel amp. Actually, they're all 3-channel amps. But the thing I like about the Mark IIIs and the 5 is that they have a crunch channel, which you can kind of dial in a crunch sound on the JP2C, but they're basically, it's got 2 lead channels and a clean channel. One thing I would say in favor of something like this purple stripe is that I take really good care of my gear, and I'm kind of freaked out about taking it out. And with an older amp like this, I mean, it's already scuffed up. Like, you want to take it out and play it. It doesn't really matter, And it's really versatile. Basically, you can switch between the channels. I've got an ES8 switcher that I use, so I can switch between all 3 channels. I can dial in something that sounds great with all of them. And I don't know, it's just kind of my some reflections I've had lately is that I'd rather take something I feel good about bringing, and I'm less concerned about the minute differences between these amps when I'm playing live. And that's, performing is the fun part, right? I will say that, like, the Mark V, the lead channel is slightly compromised when the effects loop is on. And in a mix, you would never know. Like, in a band situation, you just would never know, because you can't stand out that much in the presence of all the other instrumentation. So I don't worry about it anymore, and I leave the loop on, and have some effects while I play. So, anyways, that's kind of the insights there. I guess I just wanted to share, like, these are all good. I really think that for where the older amps are placed, including the JP2C, because basically they predate the dual rectifier, and there was a point where Doug West and some of the folks there were trying to get a more and more aggressive sound. And when you have the EQ off and you have these things cranked, they are hairy and they sound big. They're still tight, but they've got kind of a less compressed sound than some of the newer amps do. And you can really tell where they kind of hit the limit of what they were doing, and then they switched to the dual rectifier, which is a completely different circuit. Vintage mode on the dual rectifiers is really similar to the Mark amps, and so there's definitely you can kind of see where it kind of jumped tracks there. But these older amps, in a lot of respects, you can play a lot of stuff that you wouldn't normally think would be kind of in their range, and it lends itself, I think, a little more easily to those. Again, if the EQ is off and you have the amp dialed in right. Anyways, I think that is probably about enough, but hopefully this narrative was fairly intelligible, and I'll see you next time. That's it.